scariest and strangest things that happen when you're a parent with trauma is that there comes a point in time in your child's development where all of a sudden you feel more anxious than normal. You fixate on everything, you're worried that something bad's going to happen, you feel triggered all the time and you just can't figure it out. And then there's this big aha moment that your child is the exact age that you were when you experienced something horrific or traumatic. And it all starts to make sense. Deep down inside, your child metaphorically represents exactly what you probably looked like or acted like at that age. You see how vulnerable you were, how young you were, and how you were able to move forward with that trauma. And so there's a part of you that is fearful that that exact thing is going to happen to your child. So subconsciously you're triggered, and your response is to protect them. One of the scariest and strangest things that happen when you're a parent with trauma.
When my daughter was 3 years old, I went to pick her up at a babysitter, and as we were headed home, she started to flip out in the car seat and saying like her back hurt, and I'm like, what is going on? As we continue driving, it's getting worse and worse and worse. She's never acted like this before when I picked her up before at her babysitter. And it got to a point where she was screaming at the top of her lungs. I had to pull over in the highway and figure out what's going on. And I wanted her to point at me, where is it hurting? But unfortunately, at 3 years old, her language was not very developed. And so she wasn't unable to tell me what was going on. But in that moment, I started to have a real panic attack. I started to breathe fast. I was unable to start seeing clearly. I started to cry. And I had a literal flashback to when I was 5 or 6 years old and being sexually abused by a cousin. And immediately I told myself, I will never put my daughter in anybody else's hands. And that was the moment when I decided I no longer wanted to work full time because I didn't trust anyone. And it was the catalyst that got me to starting my business. So I never had to rely on anybody to raise my children.
One of the scariest and strangest things that happen when you're a parent with trauma is that
this is actually true, and I always say I don't quite remember when my trauma started. I just know certain significant events, right? And because of those traumas, I've been super anxious since I became a mother, and I mean overly anxious. Those who knows me know exactly what I'm talking about. It was to the point where I wouldn't even let my baby go alone with her own father, not because I didn't trust him, but because of the traumas that I went through. I wouldn't let anybody watch my children because of the shit that I went through with family and with other children. And the thing is, I really do see different parts of me in each and every child of mine. And knowing how people are, not even only in my family, but in the world in general, it always triggers a lot in me because people claim that they love people like me, but then they try their hardest to tear us the fuck down and hurt.
One of the scariest and strangest things that happen when you're a parent with trauma is that
gentle parenting without a village is the hardest thing that I've ever done. And every time I complain about how exhausting it is, I always have someone say, why don't you just hire help? Why don't you just get a babysitter? And I tell them I just don't trust anybody. And I always get labeled as someone who's being overly dramatic or exaggerating. And I don't think people understand how much childhood trauma affects you way into the future, especially when you become a parent. I was essayed multiple times as a child and physically and verbally abused by family members, by my mom, and I have trauma that I'm still working through, healing my inner child. But when you learn to read body language in order to survive, you see a lot of evil in people that other people can't see. So while others may find other people trustworthy, you see right through that and you see things that other people can't. And are there good babysitters? Absolutely. Are there evil ones? Yes. Am I willing to roll the dice and take the risk? No. Does it make my parenting harder? A lot harder. A lot harder. Is it worth it knowing that my kids are safe and that they'll never go through what I went through? Absolutely. Yes. I'm not exaggerating. I'm just protecting my kids.
One of the scariest and strangest things that happen when you're a parent with trauma is that there.
So what she's saying is so true, because this is something that I deal with and why I'm so protective of my kids and I am the way I am, and I think why I'm more anxious than I've been my whole life, because I've always been anxious, but now I've been more. So yeah, basically, my moment was, well, just to rewind, when I was little, I was like 9 or 8 years old, and my brother, my big brother, was like my hero. You know, he was 7 years older than me. You know, we did so much stuff together. He was just, yeah, he was pretty much my hero, you know. And one day he comes home and he gives me a bunch of comic books and he says, hey, don't let anyone ever tell you that I don't love you, you know. And I was like, okay, it's weird, but whatever, you know, I love you too. And then later on, I go into his room, right, and I open the door and he's gone. His stuff is gone. He's gone. And I just remember standing there feeling abandoned, because it's like, what the fuck? Why did he leave? What the fuck's going on? And I remember my family going, where is he? What happened? Blah, blah, blah. Mind you, we had a one-story house, and basically what happened is he left, he ran away. He went through the window and went to his mom's house, because my dad and his mom were divorced, and he wanted to party and do drugs, and she was that way, so he just left to live the party life, and my dad wouldn't let him. But basically, I remember opening that door and that feeling of abandonment. And I think that's where my DID started a lot too, because I had to now be the brother and the sister and the son and the daughter for my family. But my waking moment for me was when my ex-husband left the same way. He just left and didn't come back. And I looked at my son and I seen me and I go, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen to you or your brother. And I try even today to protect them the best I can, because I know how that abandonment's like. All of a sudden your loved one's gone, you're like, where did they go? And they don't come back. And like, yeah, you know, their dad shows up every now and then, but just when he first left and he wasn't coming back and I'm looking at my son, it was me all over again. And I just knew that I knew he wasn't coming back, and we couldn't stay there, because I knew if we stayed there it was going to affect both of them. So I had to leave and go with my parents, try to change it, try to do something so they wouldn't be affected. But yeah, that shit's so true, dude. It's crazy.
One of the scariest and strangest things that happen when you're a parent with trauma.
This happened to me recently. My son, my oldest, he's 5 years old. And me and my ex-husband have 50-50 custody. He spends a week with his dad, then he spends a week with me. We both live in district and stuff, so, you know, we're really close together, and, you know, it's just kind of how things worked out. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I stay with my kids, and if my kids aren't with me, they're with my mother or my current husband's mother or dad. Occasionally they go to my dad's house, but not very often. My dad lives pretty far away. My son, my 5-year-old, came back from his dad's, and he was telling me that he's too scared living at Daddy's house. And I said, why? He says, because I'm scared of the roommate that they have. That was a trigger for me right there. Big trigger. As somebody who was sexually abused starting at a young age until I was 12, the first thing that came to my head was, what is this person doing to my child to make him scared of them? I mean, my son is a very, very loving little boy. I mean, he's never really had issues with anybody, including my current husband. I mean, trauma response immediately was, this person must be sexually abusing my child for him to say this. Mind you, I have no evidence of this, and I am just reacting this way because of what happened to me as a child. After further talking to my son, he doesn't like this person because I guess they don't share things with him, and they're just not a nice person to him. That's really all it was, but oh my God, I was so scared. I became a stay-at-home mom because I don't want that stuff that happened to me to happen to my kids. And I know statistically speaking, it's a lot less likely to happen to my kids because I have all boys, but less likely and non-existent are two completely different things. So if you've offered to watch my kids and I've told you no, or don't worry, I got it, or we'll do it a different day for whatever reason I needed a sitter, it has everything to do with what happened to me and how I don't want to see that happen to my kids.
One of the scariest and strangest things that happen when you're a parent with trauma.
I know there's plenty of parents that follow me, and I thought that post might resonate with some people, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to then share like a point of view of a grown child of parents with trauma, because I don't have any kids, but my parents most certainly have got their fair share of trauma. And now to further go into that, because I got like boomer parents, they're like closer to 60 than not. And from their upbringing in Australia, being brought from Europe, like child abuse was so normalized where, there were adults hitting kids, just not even their kids, just teachers, members of churches. And I've spoken about this before on TikTok and how I've got a lot of respect for my dad for, like consciously breaking the chain and even like saying to his father, like, no, I'm not going to do what you did. I'm not going to hurt my children. Because he even said all it really did was make it very difficult to have a good relationship with that parent and make you a better liar and stuff, make you want to get away with things that you think you'd get in trouble for. And now, quick warning, I need to touch on the topic of alcoholism. Because when I realised that many people my parents' age probably got their fair share of trauma just from the way everything was when they were growing up. And especially in cultures like Australia here, where it's just such a normalised binge drinking culture, very easy to see how there's a lot of people drinking to cope with their fucking trauma from their childhood.
If you find the one, you should never give her up. I think it's the way life changes when in love, yeah. I surround my soul with the